Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Last night, the most significant congressional hearing in probably decades was held in the House of Representatives. Chairman Mike Gallagher is chairman of the Select Committee on Engagement with the Chinese Communist Party. He joins me this morning. I'm not even going to be a hard time because I want to focus on the hearing, Chairman. That went very well. I played some clips. What did you think of it?
I thought it was a great effort. We had a lot of the end of the room was palpable, it was packed, and our members were there, and I think on both sides asked very serious questions the whole time. And obviously it just happened a few hours ago, so the dust is still settling. But I wonder if when the dust settling, the big takeaway will be that 4 hours you had the Democrats and Republicans just talking in unseen terms about the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party, and just how this is a threat right here at home to our own sovereignty. I also there's a lot of ideas that came out in a question and answer session with the wit that I think we can build upon in terms of a policy and legislative agenda going forward. I also thought that Ms. Tong Yi's testimony in particular was powerful. Just that she was there at Tiananmen.
Chairman, you are getting a blowback from your computer. I've left it up to you to organize your technology this morning from Washington, D.C., and you clearly have failed that test. So obviously your staff was on top of it last night because it was beautifully produced and it was wonderfully argued, and the articulate quotes that got posted I were able to play. But now you're just a mess because you did it yourself, right?
I'm alone here. I'm a Luddite. I don't know if I fixed it by turning down the volume at all. As you can see, I have yet to work out this morning, too. So this is why I need staff, apparently.
If I had a producer, we could fix this, but I don't. So we're going to struggle through. All I'm going to tell you is to talk slowly. I liked the Pottinger testimony a lot. Did your Democrat friends pay attention to him on TikTok?
I hope so. That's why I asked him in my first question about TikTok, and he really hammered on what I think is most important. We're not talking about TikTok's ability to spy on you or exfiltrate data. The real threat is allowing ByteDance, by extension, the Chinese Communist Party, to control the flow of information into the United States. If we allow them to be dominant, then we will have ceded the information domain. I fear that the Five Eyes countries, our closest ally, are very close to a point of maximum danger here, a point of no return. We simply can't allow the CCP to determine news we get. If they have that power, they'll have the ability to influence elections, have the ability to control our national identity. I thought Pottinger on point in how he talked about that.
You're back. Now tell us what you meant by an existential crisis last night.
And this is where Pottinger's testimony, I think, was particularly valuable. If you ignore the charm offensive, if you ignore their messaging to global elites in Davos and focus instead on what the CCP says to itself and to the Chinese people, it's clear that they have designs on world domination and want to render us subordinate, humiliated, and wholly irrelevant on the world stage. And that is why I think the stakes are existential, because they're not just trying to perfect their model of Orwellian techno-totalitarian control within their borders. Increasingly, they're trying to export that model around the world. And look, we had an event before the hearing with a bunch of Hong Kong activists. These are friends of people that 2 years ago, 47 people were jailed in Hong Kong for having the temerity to organize an unofficial election. Hong Kong eviscerated the idea of one country, two systems. And when I was in Taiwan, they were pointing to Hong Kong as evidence that this threat from the CCP is spreading beyond Beijing's borders. So we have to wake up to the fact that this is threatening our own sovereignty here at home. The Chinese spy balloon is perfect evidence as to why that's the case. And that was one of the messages we tried to convey in the hearing last night.
Now, I did notice a packed room. I believe C-SPAN carried it. There were good clips. Kudos to your comms team, by the way, because they put out exactly what you need to do, which is put out clips that people can play. Where is hearing 2 going to be, and what do you do differently to keep up interest in outlining the threat that the Chinese communists pose to the United States?
Well, I think we don't just do hearings. Actually, I thought the event we did in New York, in Manhattan, in front of this illicit CCP police station on Saturday was exactly the type of thing you can do beyond the traditional congressional hearing. It was carried live in some cases on Fox and other networks. So we're trying to think through, can you do stuff outside of the halls of Congress that's unique, that's interesting, that really drives attention to the CCP threat? So it may be the case that our next major event is not even a congressional hearing. We're experimenting with the format. I think you saw, we tried to incorporate some video last night that was interesting. We had members that used audiovisual aids in their questioning. So when we do hearings, we're going to do more of that. Perhaps we try and condense the time a little bit from 3 hours to an hour and a half. Not quite sure how we accomplish that, but we're going to try and get creative because, we really do want to engage the American people in a discussion about why this matters. And the standard sort of boring congressional hearing is not going to get that job done.
The threat analysis about TikTok was very riveting. I am curious if you're ever going to do a first strike threat hearing, because I asked Mr. Ramaswamy this week about the triad. He's your age. He didn't know what it was, and that's okay. You can learn. You can still run for president. But he's a half-billionaire, and he's a very successful entrepreneur, and he graduated from Harvard like you got out of Princeton, and you would expect people to know the nuclear triad. But I'm beginning to think that an entire generation of Americans have no strategic reserve when it comes to mutual assured destruction and the triad stuff, and that you'll never get people to believe that China's other than an economic actor. Do you think you can?
I think we can. I think General McMaster talked about the military threat in the context of a confrontation over Taiwan last night. We really want to hone in on those military threats. And one of the messages I have for my colleagues, and one of my biggest takeaways from my recent trip to Taiwan, is that in any confrontation over Taiwan, even if it were a lower-level blockade scenario, the American homeland would be a target. You have to assume that our critical infrastructure, if nothing else, would be targeted with cyber weapons. If we got into a larger war, obviously they would try and attack our aerial and seaports of debarkation. So this would not be confined to the Taiwan Strait. This would quickly escalate, and we need to harden our defenses at home. So we do want to hone in on that. We want to also hone in on the fact that the economic and financial aspects of a conflict over Taiwan are never incorporated into our war games. And as you see in Ukraine, you can't just be making up a sanctions regime on the fly. It doesn't work. It creates chaos, and it doesn't have the punitive effect that sanctions are intended to have against an adversary.
What do you think General Secretary Xi's lesson from Ukraine is, if any?
Well, yeah, I think he's studying Russian failures so that he does not repeat those failures when he takes over Taiwan or when he tries to take over Taiwan. I think the biggest lesson is that if you're going to pursue a rapid fait accompli approach, you better get it right. And I think Putin was a bit too lazy in his assumptions. I think another lesson is just the importance of having deep stockpiles of munitions. And that's another takeaway of my trip from Taiwan, as we've talked about. The good news is it's an island. It's very hard to conquer. It's very hard to invade. It's hard to do an amphibious landing. The bad news is it's an island. So it's far more difficult to resupply than Ukraine, because Ukraine has a land border that you can send supplies through. So I'm sure Xi is internalizing all of this. We don't know when he's going to wake up and try and make a move, but I remain convinced that we are in the window of maximum danger, that we're not moving with a requisite sense of urgency, and we have to arm Taiwan to the teeth so as to avoid another catastrophic collapse of deterrence like that we saw in Ukraine.
Are you going to give us a briefing from this committee on the hypersonics that China has and the threat that they pose of a hypersonic Pearl Harbor?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I actually think this is a perfect case of why we need broader selective economic decoupling, because as we learned last year, when they tested a hypersonic glide vehicle, the Financial Times reported it, they developed their program in part with access to U.S. technology. So this is a clear case where we have to do a better job of making sure that our technology is not being used or stolen by the Chinese Communist Party to advance their military modernization. Put differently, we do not want to be funding or enabling our own destruction. And General McMaster talked about that a bit last night. So I think that's a perfect case that illustrates how and why we must do a better job when it comes to selective decoupling.
All right, I want to finish by asking about the Democrats on the committee, because you've stressed how bipartisan this is. They were full participants last night. I'd like to know who you think made some points on the Democratic side, who you would talk up, who you would direct us to for the conversations that they had last night with the witnesses and their opening statements.
Well, I do think the ranking member was great in terms of his working with our team to make sure we could pull off the hearing, given that we passed rules that morning to do the hearing. You know, Richie Torres came with me to the CCP police station in New York and then the student roundtable afterwards. And his remarks were fantastic, and his remarks in his questioning session last night were fantastic as well, just talking about the totalitarian threat posed by the CCP and the threat it poses to freedom. There were a lot of Democrats who I thought were great on economic issues, Jake Auchincloss, and then Seth Moulton honed right in on the Taiwan question and asked McMaster about the lessons of Ukraine for Taiwan. All of those I thought were very good contributions.
So this is important for the audience to understand. This is not a Republican-Democrat deal. And I can't stress enough, it's like the Kefauver Committee on Organized Crime. You didn't know who the Republicans were, you didn't know who the Democrats are, you didn't care. They focused on the threat. So the more that you talk up Democrats, I know that Republicans don't like that sometimes, but we have one adversary, not two, right? We're not fighting the Democrats in the context of this hearing. We're trying to alert the American people. And how do you feel that is going?
Last night I thought it went great. I think, if you're the CCP watching, you're probably scared because you see that level of agreement among Democrats and Republicans in terms of recognizing that the CCP is our foremost threat. There are meaningful differences between the parties. I'm not trying to gloss over that, and we're going to have debates and some, heated debates at times, but we just want to make sure that we're bringing the whole country along when it comes to standing up for our sovereignty.
Excellent start last night, Chairman Gallagher. Technologically challenged on your own, but nevertheless a great guest. Thank you for joining me this morning.